On December 2nd, 2010, in a conference room in Zurich, one man opened an envelope. And in that single moment, the fate of thousands of human beings was sealed. They didn't know it yet. Most of them hadn't even left their villages in Nepal, India, or Bangladesh. But the decision made in that room would cost more lives than most wars. This is the story FIFA spent 12 years trying to bury. Every 4 years, the World Cup promises the same thing: unity, celebration, the beautiful game bringing the entire planet together for 1 month of pure joy. That's the story you were sold about Qatar 2022. Glittering stadiums rising from the desert, air-conditioned arenas defying 120-degree heat, a tiny nation of less than 3 million people hosting the biggest sporting event on Earth. But underneath the spectacle was a different story, one involving secret payments, a controversial vote, and a human cost that investigative journalists spent over a decade trying to expose. Tonight, we're not talking about goals or trophies. We're talking about how a football tournament became one of the most contested human rights stories of the 21st century, and why the truth is more complicated and more disturbing than either side wants to admit. To understand this story, you have to go back to December 2nd, 2010. FIFA's executive committee, 22 men with extraordinary power and almost no public accountability, gathered to decide who would host the 2022 World Cup. The candidates were the United States, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and Qatar. On paper, this made no sense. Qatar had no World Cup history, no football infrastructure to speak of, summer temperatures that regularly exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and a population smaller than many single cities bidding against it. Then FIFA President Sepp Blatter opened the envelope. Qatar had won. The football world was stunned. Then came the questions. How did a nation with almost no World Cup pedigree beat the United States and Australia? The answer, journalists would later allege, involved a man named Mohammed bin Hammam. Bin Hammam was a Qatari billionaire and one of the most powerful men in global football, sitting on FIFA's executive committee for 16 years. In 2014, the Sunday Times published what it called a bombshell cache of leaked documents, emails, financial records, and internal communications, allegedly showing bin Hammam had funneled over $5 million to football officials around the world in the years before the vote. According to the investigation, payments allegedly flowed to officials across Africa, with significant influence over how their continent's representatives would vote. Qatar's bid committee denied any connection, stating bin Hammam played, in their words, no official or unofficial role in their campaign. But there's a complication here, and it matters. Bin Hammam was never proven in any FIFA ethics ruling to have rigged the Qatar vote specifically. He was banned for life from football in 2012, but for an unrelated case involving payments to Caribbean football officials during his failed campaign against Blatter for the FIFA presidency. The Qatar bid corruption case itself was investigated by FIFA's own ethics prosecutor, Michael Garcia. Garcia compiled an extensive report. FIFA released only a summary. Garcia called the summary so erroneous, he resigned in protest. To this day, his full report has never been made fully public. Qatar kept the tournament, and construction began on a scale the world had never seen. Qatar needed to build 7 new stadiums from nothing, along with hotels, roads, an entire metro system, and infrastructure for hundreds of thousands of visitors. This required a workforce Qatar simply didn't have, so they imported one. Nearly 2 million migrant workers, primarily from India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, arrived to build the tournament from the ground up. Many came from desperate poverty, recruited by agents who promised good wages and safe conditions. What many found instead was a system human rights organizations would later describe as exploitative. Workers frequently couldn't change employers. Many couldn't leave the country without their employer's permission. Passports were sometimes confiscated. Wages were often delayed for months. And then there was the heat. Qatar's summer temperatures regularly climb past 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Workers were building stadiums, often outdoors, in conditions that push the human body to its absolute limit. This is where the story gets complicated, and where most coverage either oversimplifies or distorts what actually happened. In February 2021, The Guardian published an investigation that would define how the world understood this World Cup. The headline, 6,500 migrant workers had died in Qatar since the country won its World Cup bid in 2010. The number spread everywhere. It became the defining statistic of Qatar 2022. You probably remember it. But here's what most headlines left out. That 6,500 figure came from government death records in 5 South Asian countries, covering all migrant worker deaths in Qatar across every industry: construction, domestic work, retail, hospitality, not just World Cup construction projects specifically. The Guardian's own reporting was clear about this. The data didn't show occupations. It simply counted deaths among migrant nationals during that decade, for any cause, anywhere in Qatar. So when Qatar's World Cup organizers responded that only a small number of deaths were directly tied to World Cup stadium construction, citing a figure of around 37 worker deaths connected to stadium sites, with all but 3 classified as non-work related, they weren't necessarily lying. They were answering a different question than the one the headline implied. Hassan Al-Thawadi, the official in charge of delivering the tournament, later admitted in a television interview that the real number tied to World Cup projects broadly was likely between 400 and 500, still a staggering human cost, but a different order of magnitude than 6,500. So which number is true? The honest answer, both numbers are true, and both are incomplete. 6,500 is a real death toll of real migrant workers who came to Qatar because of the opportunities created by hosting this tournament, whether or not each death happened on a stadium construction site. 400 to 500 is a more conservative estimate specifically tied to World Cup infrastructure projects, and even that number remains disputed, and was, in Thawadi's own words, still being discussed. What nobody disputes is this: the death classification system itself was the problem. The vast majority of these deaths were labeled as natural causes, heart failure, respiratory failure, often without autopsies, in workers who were frequently young and previously healthy. As the 2022 tournament approached, pressure mounted. Qatar did make changes. They introduced a minimum wage for migrant workers. They abolished parts of the sponsorship system that had trapped workers with single employers. They introduced new heat safety regulations limiting outdoor work during the most dangerous hours. Human rights organizations called these reforms historic, and also acknowledged enforcement remained inconsistent, with many workers reporting little had changed in practice. FIFA, for its part, issued public statements expressing regret for, in their words, all of these tragedies, while disputing what they called inaccurate claims about the scale of deaths tied directly to their projects. Sepp Blatter himself, years after leaving FIFA, admitted publicly that selecting Qatar had been, in his words, a mistake, though he was referring primarily to the climate and scheduling chaos it caused, forcing the tournament into November and December for the first time in World Cup history. He did not fully reckon with the human cost. Nobody at the top fully did. In November 2022, the World Cup kicked off in Qatar. Billions watched. Lionel Messi finally won the trophy that had eluded him his entire career, in a final widely considered one of the greatest in World Cup history. The stadiums were extraordinary. The hospitality was, by most accounts, seamless. And underneath every match, every celebration, every golden trophy lift, was a question the tournament never fully answered. How many people gave their lives so this could happen? And does anyone, including FIFA, actually know the real number? The 2010 vote in that Zurich conference room set off a chain of events that stretched across continents and over a decade. It built stadiums that may never be fully used again. It created a permanent stain on FIFA's credibility that no trophy ceremony could wash away. And it left thousands of families across South Asia waiting for an honest answer. That, to this day, has never fully come. Not 6,500, not 500. The real number, the complete and verified number, may never be known, because nobody with the power to count properly ever fully tried. That perhaps is the most damning fact of all. The World Cup promises to bring the world together. In Qatar, it also exposed exactly how far apart we remain between those who build the stage and those who get to stand on it. If this story moved you, subscribe, because we're just getting started. And tell us in the comments, which hidden history, which buried scandal, which untold story should we investigate next?